The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting gentle shadows across the breakfast table where Catherine sat with her 3 children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis chattered excitedly about their upcoming school events, their voices filling the cozy kitchen with the familiar warmth of family life. Catherine smiled, watching her youngest son attempt to spread jam on his toast with more enthusiasm than skill, but, beneath her serene exterior, a storm of worry had been brewing for weeks. It had started with what she thought was simple fatigue. The demanding schedule of royal duties, coupled with the constant juggling act of motherhood, had always required immense energy. Catherine had grown accustomed to pushing through exhaustion, to maintaining her composure even when her body begged for rest. She was, after all, the Princess of Wales, a role that demanded nothing less than perfection in the public eye. But, this exhaustion felt different. It settled deep in her bones, a persistent heaviness that no amount of sleep seemed to alleviate. There were mornings when she would wake feeling as though she hadn't slept at all, despite having gone to bed early. The vibrant energy that had always defined her seemed to be slowly draining away, like water through a crack in a vessel she couldn't see. William had been the first to notice the change. During their private moments, when the cameras weren't rolling and the public wasn't watching, he would catch her staring off into the distance with a look of concern that she couldn't quite hide. Her laughter, once so spontaneous and infectious, now seemed to require more effort. The way she held herself had changed too, as if she was carrying an invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing day. "You should see Dr. Matthews," William had suggested one evening as they walked through the gardens of their Kensington Palace apartment. The children had been tucked into bed, and, for once, they had a few precious moments alone together. "You haven't been yourself lately, darling." Catherine had initially dismissed his concerns with the same grace she applied to everything else in her life. "I'm fine, William. It's just been a busy season. The charity work, the children's schedules, the upcoming tour, there's so much to coordinate." But, even as she spoke the words, she knew they didn't ring entirely true. This wasn't the productive tiredness that came from a full calendar. This was something else, something that made her feel disconnected from her own body. The decision to seek medical advice hadn't come easily. Catherine had always been remarkably healthy, rarely needing more than the occasional checkup. She prided herself on maintaining her physical fitness, on being able to keep up with her active lifestyle and demanding responsibilities. The thought that something might be seriously wrong felt almost impossible to accept. Dr. Matthews, the royal physician who had cared for the family for years, conducted a thorough examination in the privacy of a discreet medical facility. Catherine answered his questions with characteristic honesty, describing the fatigue, the occasional nausea, the subtle changes in her appetite that she had been attributing to stress. She mentioned the way her clothes had begun to feel looser, how she sometimes felt short of breath after activities that had never winded her before. "We'll run some tests," Dr. Matthews had said in his calm, professional manner. "Most likely it's nothing serious, but, given your symptoms, I'd like to be thorough." His words were meant to be reassuring, but Catherine caught the note of caution in his voice that he tried to hide. The waiting period that followed was perhaps the most difficult part. Catherine continued with her royal duties, smiling and waving at public events, cutting ribbons and giving speeches with the same poise that had made her beloved around the world. But, privately, she found herself studying every sensation in her body with new intensity, wondering if each ache or moment of tiredness held significance she had previously overlooked. William became her anchor during those uncertain days. He would reach for her hand during meetings, offer silent support with just a look across a crowded room. Their marriage had always been built on a foundation of deep friendship and mutual respect, but now it felt like they were facing their first truly serious challenge together as a team. The children, thankfully, remained blissfully unaware of their mother's concerns. George continued to show them his latest school projects with pride, Charlotte practiced her piano pieces with determination, and Louis brought them his endless stream of creative drawings and stories. Their innocence and joy provided Catherine with a sense of normalcy that she clung to during the uncertain days of waiting for test results. When Dr. Matthews called to request a meeting rather than simply sharing results over the phone, Catherine felt her heart sink. Good news, she had learned from experience, was typically delivered quickly and with celebration. Bad news required careful conversation, privacy, and time to process. The meeting took place in Dr. Matthews' office on a gray Tuesday morning in early March. Catherine had arranged her schedule carefully, ensuring that no one would expect her presence elsewhere. William sat beside her, his hand steady and warm in hers as they faced whatever news awaited them. "I'm afraid the tests have revealed something concerning," Dr. Matthews began, his voice gentle but direct. "The blood work and imaging show signs of cancer. We'll need additional tests to determine the exact type and stage, but I wanted you to know immediately so we could begin planning your treatment." The word cancer seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy and surreal. Catherine heard it, understood it intellectually, but for a moment it felt like they were discussing someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to her, not now, not when her children were still so young and needed her so desperately. William's grip on her hand tightened, and she could feel the tremor that ran through him despite his effort to remain composed. In that moment, she realized that this diagnosis would affect not just her, but everyone who loved her. The thought of putting her family through the fear and uncertainty of cancer treatment felt almost as overwhelming as the diagnosis itself. "What are our options?" William asked, his voice steady despite the emotion Catherine could see in his eyes. Always the protector, he was already shifting into problem-solving mode, trying to find a way to fix something that couldn't be fixed with determination alone. Dr. Matthews outlined the treatment plan with clinical precision, explaining the various stages of treatment that would be necessary, the timeline they were looking at, and the realistic prognosis based on early detection. Catherine listened carefully, asking practical questions about how the treatment might affect her energy levels, her ability to care for her children, and whether she would need to significantly alter her royal duties. The drive home from the appointment passed in relative silence. Both Catherine and William seemed lost in their own thoughts, processing the magnitude of what they had just learned. The landscape outside their car window looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but everything felt fundamentally different. They were no longer simply the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge dealing with the normal pressures of royal life. They had become a family facing cancer together. That evening, after the children had been fed, bathed, and tucked into bed, Catherine and William sat together in their private sitting room and began to discuss the practical implications of her diagnosis. They would need to tell the children, though they agreed to wait until they had more information about the treatment plan. They would need to inform the palace, though they wanted to maintain as much privacy as possible during the treatment process. Most importantly, they would need to find a way to help their children understand what was happening without frightening them unnecessarily. Catherine had always been determined to give George, Charlotte, and Louis as normal a childhood as possible despite their unique circumstances. Now she faced the challenge of explaining why their mother would be spending time in hospitals and why she might not always have the energy to play as actively as she once had. The conversation lasted long into the night, covering everything from medical logistics to media management to the emotional support their family would need in the coming months. William proved himself to be exactly the partner Catherine needed, offering practical solutions while never minimizing the emotional weight of what they were facing. As they finally prepared for bed, Catherine caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by how normal she looked. There was no visible sign of the cancer growing inside her body, no external indication of the battle she was about to fight. She looked like the same woman who had woken up that morning, but she felt fundamentally changed by the knowledge of what lay ahead. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams that seemed to shift between normal family scenes and hospital corridors. Catherine would wake briefly, remember the diagnosis, feel the weight of worry settle over her again, and then drift back into uneasy sleep. William lay beside her, and she could tell from his breathing that he was experiencing the same restless night. The next morning brought the challenge of maintaining normalcy for the children while beginning to process their new reality. Catherine made breakfast with the same care as always, helped Charlotte find her favorite hair ribbon, listened to George practice his upcoming presentation about dinosaurs. But, underneath these familiar routines, she was acutely aware that everything had changed. Over the following days, Catherine and William began the delicate process of sharing their news with close family members. The conversations were difficult but necessary, and Catherine was touched by the immediate outpouring of love and support from both sides of their family. Everyone wanted to know how they could help, what they could do to make the journey easier for Catherine and the children. The decision about when and how to share the news publicly would prove to be one of the most challenging aspects of the entire experience. Catherine understood that as a public figure, there would eventually be intense interest in her health and treatment. But she also desperately wanted to protect her family's privacy during what would undoubtedly be a vulnerable and difficult time. For now, they decided to keep the diagnosis private while Catherine began the early stages of treatment. This would give them time to establish routines, help the children adjust, and determine how much of their journey they wanted to share with the world. As Catherine prepared for her first treatment appointment, she reflected on how many people around the world were facing similar diagnoses, often without the resources and support system she was fortunate to have. The thought made her more determined than ever to use her experience to bring awareness and hope to others walking the same difficult path. The morning of her first treatment, Catherine woke early and spent extra time with each of her children. She helped Louis with his shoelaces, braided Charlotte's hair exactly the way she liked it, and listened as George shared his excitement about an upcoming school trip. These small, precious moments felt even more significant now, and Catherine tried to commit every detail to memory. William would accompany her to the treatment, and they had arranged for Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, to spend the day with the children. The children knew their mother had a doctor's appointment, but they didn't yet understand the full scope of what was happening. That conversation would come later, when Catherine felt more prepared to help them process such heavy news. As they drove toward the hospital, Catherine felt a mixture of fear, determination, and hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was surrounded by love and had access to excellent medical care. She thought about all the mothers around the world who were fighting similar battles, often with far fewer resources, and felt a renewed sense of purpose in her role as a public figure who might eventually be able to use her experience to help others. The treatment facility was discreet and private, allowing Catherine to begin her cancer journey away from public scrutiny. As she settled into the chair for her first infusion, William beside her with a stack of books and magazines, Catherine said a quiet prayer of gratitude for her family, her medical team, and the hope that this treatment would give her many more years to watch her children grow up. The first treatment session passed without major incident, though Catherine felt the strange sensation of powerful medications flowing through her body, fighting against the cancer cells that threatened her health. She read, dozed, and talked quietly with William about their children's upcoming activities and their hopes for the summer holidays. By the time they returned home that evening, Catherine felt tired but cautiously optimistic. She had taken the first step in what would be a long journey, but it was a step toward healing and recovery. The children greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, and, for a moment, life felt wonderfully, blessedly normal. That night, as she tucked each child into bed, Catherine allowed herself to hope that this difficult chapter in their family's story would ultimately have a positive ending. She was determined to fight with everything she had, not just for herself, but for the three little people who needed their mother to be healthy and strong for many years to come. The weeks that followed Catherine's first treatment fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting in its predictability. Every few days, she would make the quiet journey to the treatment center, where she had begun to recognize the familiar faces of other patients fighting their own battles against cancer. There was Margaret, an elderly woman who always brought her knitting and shared stories about her grandchildren, and James, a young father who worked on his laptop between treatments, determined to maintain his business while fighting for his health. These fellow patients became an unexpected source of strength for Catherine. In the treatment room, stripped of titles and public personas, they were simply people united by a common struggle. Margaret would ask about Catherine's children with genuine warmth, never mentioning her royal status. James would share funny stories about his toddler's latest adventures, creating moments of laughter that felt precious in such a sterile environment. Catherine found herself looking forward to these interactions almost as much as she valued the medical care she was receiving. There was something profoundly healing about being seen simply as another mother, another person fighting to get well, rather than as the Princess of Wales whose every public appearance was scrutinized and analyzed. At home, the challenge of maintaining normalcy while managing the side effects of treatment proved more difficult than Catherine had anticipated. The fatigue was unlike anything she had experienced before, a bone-deep exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Some mornings, she would wake feeling as though she had run a marathon in her sleep, her body heavy and unresponsive despite her mind's determination to face the day with energy and purpose. William had become increasingly protective, quietly rearranging his own schedule to be home more often. He took over many of the household routines that Catherine had always handled, from packing school lunches to supervising homework time. His efforts were loving and appreciated, but Catherine sometimes felt frustrated by her reduced capacity to care for her children in the way she had always done. The children, with the remarkable adaptability that seemed to be a gift of childhood, had adjusted to their mother's new limitations with surprising grace. George, now old enough to understand that his mother wasn't feeling well, had become her gentle helper, bringing her glasses of water and sitting quietly beside her when she needed to rest. Charlotte showed her love through small gestures, drawing pictures of their family and leaving them on Catherine's bedside table where she would find them each morning. Louis, still too young to fully understand what was happening, continued to approach his mother with his usual boundless affection. His spontaneous hugs and silly jokes became medicine of a different kind, reminding Catherine of the pure joy that existed in their family despite the current challenges. The decision about when to tell the children about the cancer diagnosis weighed heavily on both Catherine and William. They had agreed to wait until Catherine had completed a few rounds of treatment and had a better understanding of how her body was responding, but the time was rapidly approaching when they would need to have that difficult conversation. Dr. Matthews had been encouraged by Catherine's initial response to treatment. Her blood markers were showing positive changes, and, while it was still early in the process, there were good reasons to be cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. This news provided Catherine with the emotional foundation she needed to begin planning how to share her diagnosis with their children. The conversation took place on a quiet Sunday afternoon in their private sitting room at Kensington Palace. Catherine had spent the morning resting, gathering her strength for what she knew would be one of the most difficult discussions she had ever had with her children. William sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring as they called George, Charlotte, and Louis to join them. "We need to talk to you about something important," Catherine began, her voice gentle but serious enough to capture their attention. The children settled onto the comfortable sofa, George sitting up straighter with the instinctive awareness that something significant was about to be shared. Catherine explained her illness in terms that were honest but age-appropriate. She told them that she had been feeling tired because she had something called cancer, which was like bad cells in her body that needed special medicine to make them go away. She assured them that she was getting the best possible care and that many people with cancer got completely better after their treatment. George's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. His face crumpled with worry as he asked if his mother was going to die, a question that hit Catherine like a physical blow despite her preparation for it. She pulled him close, fighting back her own tears as she promised him that she was fighting hard to get well and that the doctors were very hopeful about her treatment. Charlotte, ever perceptive, wanted to know if the cancer was her fault somehow, wondering if she had made her mother sick by being naughty or demanding too much attention. Catherine's heart ached as she realized how children's minds worked to make sense of frightening situations, often placing blame on themselves for things completely beyond their control. Louis, at 4 years old, seemed to understand that something serious was happening but struggled to grasp the full implications. He wanted to know if the medicine would make his mother feel better quickly, disappointed to learn that it would take many months before she would be completely well again. The family spent the rest of that afternoon together, talking through their fears and feelings, establishing new routines that would help everyone feel secure during Catherine's treatment. They decided that Catherine would continue to be involved in as many of their activities as possible, but that there would be times when she needed extra rest and that this was part of getting better. William proved to be particularly skilled at helping the children understand the practical aspects of their new reality. He explained that their mother would sometimes wear hats or scarves because the medicine might make her hair different for a while. He assured them that their grandmother Carol would be spending more time with them, not because their parents didn't want to be with them, but because they all wanted to make sure Catherine had the best chance to recover. In the days following this family discussion, Catherine noticed subtle changes in how her children interacted with her. They had become more gentle, more considerate, as if they understood that their mother was precious and fragile in a way they hadn't recognized before. George would ask permission before climbing onto her lap, Charlotte would offer to help with tasks that Catherine had always handled independently, and Louis would pat her arm softly when he hugged her goodnight. These changes were both touching and heartbreaking for Catherine. She was grateful for their love and consideration, but she also mourned the loss of their carefree innocence. Cancer had not only invaded her body, it had also forced her children to confront the reality that parents could be vulnerable and mortal, concepts that seemed too heavy for their young hearts to carry. As Catherine progressed through her treatment schedule, she began to experience some of the side effects that Dr. Matthews had warned her about. The nausea was manageable with medication, but it left her feeling disconnected from food in a way that made family mealtimes challenging. She had always enjoyed cooking with her children, teaching them about nutrition and the pleasure of sharing meals together. Now, even the smell of certain foods could trigger waves of queasiness that forced her to leave the kitchen. The hair loss began gradually, starting with increased shedding that Catherine initially hoped she could manage with careful styling. But, within a few weeks, it became clear that she would need to make more dramatic adjustments to her appearance. The decision to cut her hair short before it fell out naturally was emotional but practical, and she found unexpected freedom in the bold new look. William's reaction to her shorter hairstyle was everything she could have hoped for. He told her she looked beautiful, and, more importantly, he meant it. His unwavering support and continued attraction to her, regardless of the physical changes brought on by treatment, provided Catherine with a sense of security that proved invaluable during moments when she felt most unlike herself. The children adapted to their mother's changing appearance with the remarkable resilience they had shown throughout the entire process. Charlotte even asked if she could cut her own hair shorter to match her mother's, a request that brought tears to Catherine's eyes and reminded her of the fierce loyalty and love that connected their family. Public appearances became increasingly challenging as Catherine's treatment progressed. She had always taken pride in her ability to look polished and energetic during royal engagements, but the combination of fatigue and medication made it difficult to maintain her usual standards. The palace communications team worked closely with Catherine and William to carefully select which events were most important for her to attend, allowing her to focus her limited energy on the engagements that mattered most. The decision to significantly reduce Catherine's public schedule was not made lightly. She understood the disappointment this would cause for many organizations and charities that had been counting on her presence at important events. But Dr. Matthews had been clear that rest and stress reduction were crucial components of her treatment success, and Catherine was determined to give herself the best possible chance for full recovery. The media speculation about Catherine's reduced presence at public events became increasingly intense. Royal correspondence and gossip publications began to circulate theories about everything from marital problems to secret pregnancies. The wild inaccuracy of these speculations was almost amusing, but Catherine worried about how the constant scrutiny affected her family and whether the children might hear inappropriate comments or questions from their peers at school. William became fiercely protective of their privacy during this period, working with palace security and communications teams to ensure that Catherine could move between their home and the treatment center without being photographed or followed. The lengths to which they had to go to maintain this privacy sometimes felt exhausting, but it allowed Catherine to focus on her health rather than managing public perceptions. One particularly difficult day occurred during Catherine's 6th week of treatment. She had experienced a more severe reaction to the latest round of chemotherapy, leaving her bedridden for 2 days with crushing fatigue and nausea that medication couldn't completely control. The children, who had been so understanding and patient, began to show signs of missing their mother's active presence in their daily lives. Charlotte, in particular, seemed to struggle with the change in family dynamics. She had always been especially close to Catherine, sharing interests in art and music that created special bonding time between mother and daughter. Now, when Catherine was too tired to sit at the piano or help with art projects, Charlotte became withdrawn and clingy, clearly worried about her mother's condition despite reassurances that the treatment was working. It was during this low point that Catherine made the decision to create special memory projects with each of her children, activities they could work on together even when she didn't have the energy for more demanding interactions. With George, she began writing down family stories and history, creating a record of their adventures and traditions that he could help her compile during quiet afternoons together. For Charlotte, Catherine suggested they design and create a special photo album documenting their family's favorite moments, allowing them to spend time together looking through pictures and sharing memories while Catherine rested on the couch. These sessions became precious for both of them, providing Charlotte with her mother's undivided attention while requiring minimal physical energy from Catherine. With Louis, Catherine established a daily ritual of story time that could happen even on her most difficult days. She would lie down in his bed with him, reading familiar picture books or making up simple stories about brave little princes who went on adventures. These quiet moments became anchors of normalcy for both of them, proof that their special relationship could continue even during challenging times. The support from extended family during this period proved invaluable. Catherine's mother, Carol, essentially moved in to help manage household routines and provide stability for the children. Her presence allowed William to continue some of his royal duties while ensuring that someone was always available to provide the children with attention and care when Catherine needed to rest. The Queen, despite her advanced age and her own health concerns, made a point of staying closely connected with Catherine's progress. Her calls and visits provided not just emotional support but also practical wisdom from someone who had navigated decades of public life while managing personal challenges. The Queen's matter-of-fact approach to difficulty and her genuine affection for Catherine became sources of strength during the most challenging days of treatment. As Catherine approached the halfway point of her treatment plan, she began to feel cautiously optimistic about her progress. The regular monitoring appointments showed that her body was responding well to the chemotherapy, and Dr. Matthews expressed growing confidence in her prognosis. This encouraging news provided Catherine with the emotional energy she needed to begin thinking about how and when she might share her journey with the public. The idea of eventually speaking openly about her cancer experience had been germinating in Catherine's mind for weeks. She recognized that her platform as Princess of Wales could be used to bring awareness and hope to other families facing similar challenges. But the timing and approach for such a revelation required careful consideration, balancing her family's privacy with her desire to help others who might benefit from hearing her story. As autumn settled over London, bringing with it the crisp air and golden leaves that Catherine had always associated with new beginnings, she found herself at a turning point in both her treatment and her perspective on sharing her journey with the world. The chemotherapy was progressing better than anyone had dared hope, and Dr. Matthews had begun using words like excellent response and very encouraging during their regular checkups. Catherine had completed nearly 3/4 of her planned treatment protocol, and the visible improvements in her energy levels and overall health were becoming apparent to everyone around her. She was able to spend longer periods playing with the children, had returned to taking short walks in the gardens at Kensington Palace, and, most importantly, was beginning to feel like herself again in ways that went beyond mere physical recovery. The transformation wasn't just medical, it was deeply emotional and spiritual as well. The months of facing her own mortality, of being forced to slow down and reassess her priorities, had given Catherine a new perspective on what truly mattered in life. The constant pressure to maintain a perfect public image, which had once felt so important, now seemed almost trivial compared to the simple joy of watching Louis learn to ride his bicycle or helping Charlotte with her homework. This shift in perspective had begun to influence Catherine's thinking about her role as Princess of Wales and how she might use her experience to help others. During the long hours of treatment, when she sat connected to 4 lines while powerful medications flowed through her system, she had plenty of time to observe the other patients around her and listen to their stories. There was Sarah, a single mother of 2 who cleaned houses for a living and had no sick leave to cover her treatment days. Catherine watched her struggle to manage childcare arrangements and medical appointments while maintaining the income her family desperately needed. There was David, a retired teacher who had hidden his diagnosis from his adult children for months because he didn't want to burden them with worry, sitting alone through his treatments while pretending to his family that his frequent absences were for routine medical checkups. These stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with limited resources and support systems had a profound impact on Catherine. She began to understand that her privilege and platform came with a responsibility to speak for those who didn't have access to the media attention and resources that had made her own journey more manageable. The decision to eventually go public with her cancer experience wasn't made lightly or quickly. Catherine and William spent hours discussing the implications, both for their family's privacy and for Catherine's future role as a public figure. They consulted with palace communications experts, with Dr. Matthews, and, most importantly, with the children themselves as they grew more comfortable with their mother's diagnosis and treatment. George, now 12 and increasingly aware of his family's unique position in British society, had begun asking thoughtful questions about why they hadn't shared news of his mother's illness with the public. His natural empathy led him to wonder if other children might benefit from knowing that even princesses could get sick and get better, that cancer was something that could be fought and overcome. Charlotte, with her artistic sensibility and emotional intelligence, had been creating drawings and paintings throughout Catherine's treatment that captured both the sadness and hope of their family's journey. Her artwork showed not just the difficult moments, but also the love and support that had carried them through, the special traditions they had developed, and the gratitude they all felt for Catherine's improving health. Even Louis, in his innocent 4-year-old way, had begun talking about how brave his mother was and how the sick medicine was helping her get strong again. His simple acceptance of the situation and his continued faith that everything would be fine had been a source of strength for the entire family. As Catherine entered the final phase of her treatment, she began working with Palace Communications advisors to craft a message that would allow her to share her experience in a way that honored both her family's privacy and her responsibility as a public figure. The challenge was finding words that would convey the reality of what they had been through without sensationalizing the experience or inviting inappropriate scrutiny of her medical details. The first draft of her statement was clinical and brief, the kind of formal announcement that the palace typically released about royal health matters. But, as Catherine read through it, she realized that such a sterile approach wouldn't serve the purpose she hoped to achieve. If she was going to speak about cancer, it needed to be honest, personal, and hopeful in a way that might actually help other families facing similar challenges. Working with William and a small team of trusted advisors, Catherine began crafting a message that was more personal and emotionally honest than any previous royal health announcement. She wrote about the fear of receiving the diagnosis, the challenge of explaining cancer to young children, the overwhelming fatigue that made simple tasks feel insurmountable, and the profound gratitude she felt for her medical team and support system. But she also wrote about the unexpected gifts that had come from the experience, the deepened appreciation for ordinary moments with her family, the connection she had formed with fellow patients, the perspective that came from facing serious illness and emerging with hope intact. She wanted people to understand that while cancer was frightening and difficult, it wasn't necessarily a death sentence, especially when caught early and treated aggressively. The statement went through multiple revisions as Catherine worked to balance honesty with appropriateness, detail with privacy. She wanted to be specific enough to be helpful to others but general enough to protect her family from excessive scrutiny. Most importantly, she wanted the message to convey hope rather than pity, strength rather than victimization. While working on her public statement, Catherine also began planning her return to selected royal duties. Dr. Matthews had cleared her to gradually resume some public appearances, provided she continued to prioritize rest and avoided overscheduling herself. The prospect of returning to public life was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Catherine wondered how she would feel being photographed and scrutinized again after months of privacy and vulnerability. Her first public appearance after beginning treatment was carefully chosen, a visit to the children's cancer ward at a London hospital. Catherine felt it was important that her return to public duties have meaning beyond mere royal protocol, and she wanted to use her experience to bring attention and support to young patients and families dealing with cancer diagnoses. The preparation for this visit required extensive planning. Catherine worked with the hospital staff to ensure that her presence would be helpful rather than disruptive to the medical routines. She met with child psychologists to understand how to interact appropriately with young cancer patients, some of whom were dealing with much more serious diagnoses than her own. On the morning of the visit, Catherine woke with a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded her of her earliest days as a royal. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was professional but warm, authoritative but approachable. For the first time in months, she felt the familiar weight of public expectation, but it was tempered by a new sense of purpose that came from her personal experience with cancer treatment. The hospital visit proved to be both emotionally challenging and deeply rewarding. Catherine met children who were facing their cancer battles with remarkable courage and optimism, often displaying more resilience than many adults she knew. Their parents shared stories of sleepless nights and constant worry that resonated deeply with Catherine's own experience, creating connections that went far beyond the usual royal meet and greet format. One 8-year-old girl named Emma particularly touched Catherine's heart. Emma had been receiving treatment for leukemia for over a year and had lost all her hair, but she greeted Catherine with a bright smile and proudly showed off her collection of colorful headscarves. When Catherine complimented her style, Emma confided that she had been worried about meeting a real princess while bald, but seeing Catherine's own shorter hair made her feel more confident. That interaction crystallized Catherine's understanding of why sharing her story mattered. Her experience could provide hope and normalcy to other families, showing that cancer was something that could be faced with dignity and overcome with proper treatment and support. The visit reinforced her determination to be open about her journey when the time was right. Following the hospital visit, Catherine began planning a more comprehensive return to royal duties, but with significant modifications to her previous schedule. She and William decided to focus on engagements related to health, family support, and cancer awareness, using her experience to add authenticity and depth to her advocacy work. This decision represented a significant shift in how Catherine approached her royal role. Previously, she had been involved in a wide range of charitable causes, spreading her attention across multiple areas of need. Now, her personal experience had given her a specific focus and expertise that could make her advocacy more impactful and meaningful. The planning for her public statement continued throughout November, with Catherine and her team carefully considering not just the content of her message but also the timing and method of delivery. They decided against a traditional written statement, instead opting for a video message that would allow Catherine to speak directly to the public in her own voice and with her own emotional inflection. The video was filmed at Kensington Palace on a quiet December afternoon, with Catherine sitting in the same room where she had first told her children about her cancer diagnosis months earlier. She wore a simple blue sweater that complemented her eyes and spoke without a script, having practiced her message until it felt natural and authentic rather than rehearsed. In the video, Catherine spoke directly to the camera as if addressing a close friend, her voice warm but serious as she shared the story of her diagnosis and treatment. She talked about the fear that came with hearing the word cancer, the challenge of explaining the illness to her children, and the profound gratitude she felt for her medical team and support system. She also addressed the speculation that had surrounded her reduced public presence, acknowledging that many people had been wondering about her absence from royal duties. Her explanation was honest but not defensive, recognizing the public's natural concern while asserting her family's right to privacy during a difficult time. Most importantly, Catherine used the video to encourage others facing similar diagnoses to seek early treatment and maintain hope for recovery. She spoke about the advances in cancer treatment that had made her positive prognosis possible and emphasized the importance of support systems in healing from serious illness. The video concluded with Catherine expressing her excitement about gradually returning to royal duties and her commitment to using her experience to support other families affected by cancer. She thanked the public for their patience and understanding during her absence and asked for continued privacy as her family adjusted to their new normal. After filming was completed, Catherine felt a sense of relief and completion that surprised her with its intensity. The months of carrying the secret of her diagnosis had been more burdensome than she had realized, and the prospect of being able to be honest about her experience felt liberating in ways she hadn't anticipated. The decision about when to release the video required careful coordination with palace communications teams and consideration of both public interest and family readiness. Catherine wanted to ensure that her children were prepared for the increased attention that would inevitably follow her announcement, and she wanted to time the release to maximize its positive impact for cancer awareness. As December progressed and Catherine prepared for her public revelation, she found herself feeling stronger and more confident than she had in months. The combination of successful treatment, supportive family relationships, and purposeful planning for her future role had created a foundation of hope and determination that felt unshakable. The woman who had received her cancer diagnosis earlier that year had been frightened and uncertain about the future. The woman preparing to share her story with the world was transformed by her experience into someone with deeper empathy, clearer priorities, and a powerful platform for helping others face similar challenges with courage and hope. The morning of December 22 dawned gray and cold, with the kind of penetrating dampness that seemed to seep through even the warmest clothing. Catherine stood at the window of her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, watching the early morning joggers make their way through the park paths, their breath visible in small white clouds as they moved through the winter air. In just a few hours, her video message would be released to the world, ending months of carefully guarded privacy and opening a new chapter in both her personal journey and her public role. The final treatment session had taken place 3 days earlier, marking the official end of Catherine's chemotherapy protocol. Dr. Matthews had been cautiously optimistic about her response to treatment, with scan results showing no evidence of remaining cancer cells and blood markers returning to normal ranges. The word remission had been spoken with careful medical precision, but, to Catherine and her family, it sounded like the most beautiful word in the English language. William had been unusually quiet that morning, the weight of what they were about to share with the world seeming to settle on his shoulders with new intensity now that the moment had actually arrived. He had been Catherine's constant support throughout the entire journey, managing his own fear and uncertainty while providing strength for both his wife and children. Now, as they prepared to make their private struggle public, he seemed to be grappling with what it would mean to have their family's most vulnerable moments become subjects of global discussion. The children had been prepared for this day through weeks of careful conversation. George, with his growing understanding of media attention and public interest, had asked thoughtful questions about what would happen after people learned about his mother's illness. Would reporters try to interview him at school? Would photographers follow their family more aggressively? These were concerns that no 12-year-old should have to consider, but George approached them with the same maturity he had shown throughout his mother's treatment. Charlotte had been working on a special card for her mother, decorated with drawings of flowers and hearts and filled with loving messages written in her careful handwriting. She had asked if other children with sick mothers would see the video, expressing hope that it might help them feel less alone. Her empathy and concern for others, even in the midst of her family's own challenges, reminded Catherine daily of why the difficult decision to go public felt necessary and right. Louis, now 5 and more aware of the significance of what was happening around him, had wanted to know if being brave meant not being scared. Catherine had spent considerable time helping him understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but rather doing what needed to be done despite being frightened. It was a lesson she had learned deeply herself over the past months. The video production team arrived at Kensington Palace in the early afternoon, their equipment and crew carefully screened for both security and discretion. Catherine had insisted on minimal makeup and styling, wanting her appearance to reflect the honesty and authenticity of her message. The woman who appeared on camera would be the same woman who had sat through chemotherapy treatments, who had struggled with fatigue and nausea, who had worried about her children and fought for her health with quiet determination. Before filming began, Catherine spent a few minutes alone in the room where the video would be recorded, gathering her thoughts and centering herself for what she knew would be an emotionally challenging experience. The space had been carefully chosen for its warmth and intimacy, with soft lighting and comfortable furnishing that would help viewers feel as though Catherine was speaking directly to them in a personal conversation rather than delivering a formal statement. When the cameras began rolling, Catherine spoke with a combination of vulnerability and strength that seemed to capture the essence of her entire cancer journey. Her voice was clear but not artificially bright, conveying the seriousness of what she had experienced while maintaining the hope that had carried her through the darkest moments of treatment. She began by acknowledging the concern and speculation that had surrounded her absence from public life, expressing gratitude for the patience and understanding the public had shown while respecting her family's need for privacy. Her words were chosen carefully to convey appreciation without defensiveness, recognizing the natural human interest in her well-being while asserting her right to handle health challenges privately. The moment when Catherine first spoke the words "I was diagnosed with cancer" seemed to hang in the air of the recording room. Even though everyone present knew this was the purpose of the video, hearing her say it out loud carried an emotional weight that was almost palpable. William, watching from behind the cameras, felt his breath catch as his wife shared with the world the news that had changed their lives so fundamentally. Catherine spoke about the initial shock of diagnosis, the fear that had gripped her when she first heard the word cancer, and the immediate concern she had felt for her children's emotional well-being. She described the challenge of explaining serious illness to young minds while maintaining their sense of security and normalcy. Her honesty about these struggles created an immediate connection with other parents who had faced similar challenges, establishing common ground that transcended her royal status. The description of her treatment process was honest but not graphic, providing enough detail to help others understand what cancer treatment involved while respecting the privacy of her medical team and fellow patients. Catherine spoke about the fatigue that had been unlike anything she had previously experienced, the way chemotherapy had affected her energy and appetite, and the small daily adjustments that had been necessary to accommodate her body's needs during treatment. Perhaps most powerfully, Catherine talked about the unexpected gifts that had emerged from her cancer experience. She spoke about the deepened appreciation she had developed for ordinary moments with her family, the way that facing serious illness had clarified her priorities and values, and the profound gratitude she felt for her medical team and support system. These reflections transformed what could have been a purely tragic narrative into something more complex and ultimately hopeful. The video also included Catherine's acknowledgement of her privilege in having access to excellent medical care, strong family support, and the financial resources that had made her treatment journey less stressful than it might have been for others in different circumstances. This recognition led naturally into her commitment to use her experience and platform to support other families facing cancer diagnoses, particularly those with fewer resources and support systems. When Catherine spoke about her children's resilience and strength throughout the experience, her voice carried a note of maternal pride that was impossible to miss. She described their adaptability, their continued love and support, and their own brave questions and concerns about her illness. Without sharing inappropriate details about their private conversations, she painted a picture of a family that had faced serious challenges together and emerged stronger and more connected. The final portion of the video focused on Catherine's excitement about gradually returning to royal duties and her specific commitment to cancer awareness and family support advocacy. She spoke about the patients she had met during her treatment who had inspired her with their courage and determination, and her desire to ensure that her experience could somehow benefit others facing similar battles. Catherine concluded her message with words of encouragement for anyone currently facing a cancer diagnosis, emphasizing the advances in treatment that had made her positive prognosis possible and the importance of early detection and comprehensive medical care. Her final words were simple but powerful, expressing gratitude for the support she had received and hope for the future that lay ahead for her family. When filming wrapped, Catherine felt emotionally drained but also relieved in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. The months of carrying the secret of her diagnosis had created a burden she hadn't fully recognized until it was lifted. The prospect of being able to discuss her experience openly, to use it to help others, felt like emerging from a shadow into sunlight. The video was scheduled for release the following morning, giving Catherine and her family one final evening of privacy before their personal journey became public knowledge. They spent that evening together as they had learned to do during the most challenging days of treatment, simply, quietly, with full attention to each other and gratitude for their time together. The children seemed to understand the significance of the next day without needing extensive explanation. They were more affectionate than usual with Catherine, offering extra hugs and spending longer than necessary reading bedtime stories together. There was a sense of transition in the air, an awareness that their family was about to move from private struggle to public advocacy. William and Catherine stayed up late that final evening, talking about their hopes and concerns for how the video would be received and what it might mean for their future together. They discussed the potential for increased public scrutiny and media attention, but also the opportunity to use Catherine's experience to bring awareness and hope to other families facing similar challenges. When December 23 arrived, bringing with it the release of Catherine's video message, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media platforms filled with messages of support, love, and admiration for Catherine's courage in sharing her story. Cancer survivors and their families shared their own experiences, creating a wave of connection and mutual support that extended far beyond anything Catherine had imagined possible. The medical community responded with praise for Catherine's decision to speak openly about cancer treatment, recognizing the potential impact her honesty could have on encouraging early detection and reducing stigma around cancer diagnosis. Dr. Matthews, when asked for comment, spoke about Catherine's exemplary approach to treatment and her commitment to following medical advice even when it required significant personal sacrifice. Fellow members of the royal family expressed their pride and support through carefully worded statements that emphasized Catherine's strength and the family's unity during challenging times. The Queen, in particular, made it known that she was proud of Catherine's decision to use her experience to help others, calling it an example of the kind of service and dedication that defined the best aspects of royal responsibility. Perhaps most touching were the responses from ordinary families who had been touched by cancer in their own lives. Parents wrote about how Catherine's honesty had helped them explain their own diagnoses to their children. Cancer patients shared how seeing someone in the public eye discuss treatment openly had reduced their sense of isolation and shame. Medical professionals reported increased interest in cancer screening and early detection programs. The impact extended beyond Britain's borders, with international media covering Catherine's announcement and medical organizations around the world using her story to promote cancer awareness campaigns. Her willingness to be vulnerable and honest about a serious illness had created a global conversation about health, family support, and the importance of seeking medical care when needed. In the days following the video's release, Catherine began receiving thousands of letters and cards from people around the world sharing their own cancer experiences and expressing gratitude for her openness. Reading these messages became both emotionally challenging and deeply rewarding, providing Catherine with a clear sense that her decision to go public had already begun making a positive difference in other people's lives. The transition back to public life proved easier than Catherine had anticipated, partly because her new focus on cancer awareness and family support felt so naturally aligned with her personal experience. Her first public engagements following the video release were visits to cancer treatment centers and family support organizations, interactions that felt authentic and purposeful rather than dutiful. At a children's hospital in London, Catherine met with young patients and their families, sharing stories and offering encouragement based on her own experience. The connection was immediate and genuine, with children asking her direct questions about treatment and parents expressing gratitude for her willingness to discuss the challenges they all understood too well. During a visit to a cancer research facility, Catherine learned about the latest advances in treatment and early detection, knowledge that reinforced her optimism about the future for cancer patients and their families. The scientists and doctors she met spoke about the importance of public figures helping to destigmatize cancer diagnosis and treatment, noting that Catherine's openness could encourage more people to seek timely medical care. As the year drew to a close, Catherine reflected on the incredible journey her family had traveled together over the past 9 months. The woman who had received her cancer diagnosis in March felt like a different person from the one who now stood ready to enter the new year with renewed purpose and clear priorities. The cancer experience had stripped away many of the superficial concerns that had once seemed important, replacing them with deep appreciation for health, family, and the opportunity to use personal experience for the benefit of others. Catherine understood now that her royal platform came with not just privilege but responsibility, and that her own struggles could become sources of strength and hope for others facing similar challenges. Looking toward the future, Catherine felt cautiously optimistic about her health, deeply grateful for her family's support, and excited about the new direction her advocacy work would take. The cancer journey that had begun in fear and uncertainty had transformed into something unexpected, a source of purpose, connection, and hope that would shape the rest of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Most importantly, Catherine had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite being afraid, a lesson she hoped to share not just through her royal duties but through the daily example of a woman who had faced serious illness and emerged with her hope and determination intact. The tears that had fallen during her darkest moments of treatment had given way to tears of gratitude, relief, and renewed commitment to using her experience to help others find their own paths to healing and hope.